Okay. Are we ready to kick off? We're good up the back? Okay, excellent. Hi everybody, welcome to this talk today about building front-end monorepos. My name's Duncan and we're going to be talking all about sticking more than one application, so two or more applications in the same repository, which sounds a lot like a monolith, but I'll be saying that word a lot today to say, you know, we're not going to build a monolith, we're going to build a monorepo. And really what we want to do is we want to avoid this situation where we have our architecture for our front ends. I'm talking about front end code here. And we kind of organically grow and we stick all of it in the same code base. And we're trying to then have another project where we're trying to share code with. And we might end up just putting it all in the same place with no sort of setup for it. And we end up here where everything's a mess and you're copying and pasting code between these projects. And then when one piece of that code changes, you need to find the other piece that's been copied from and update that. Or you need to have, you know, a completely different repository and they're all intertwined. And you really lose confidence to be able to say, what can I change? What can I actually do without, you know, breaking something else? And that's where your velocity is going to come down and you're not going to be able to ship as much code. So this is really about having strategies to be able to keep shipping code as fast as you possibly can. So my name's Duncan, I'm from Australia, I live in Sydney, and I spend about a third of my time traveling around training software developers in best practices. I do a lot of Pluralsight as well. I actually have a Pluralsight course. I just went and checked. It's about 2 years old talking about monorepos. So I was really early in on doing monorepos in the Angular space. I do a lot of Angular, but today we're going to be talking about Angular or React. It's mostly about front-end monorepos and whether they're right fit for your company. The other 2/3 of my time when I'm not training people, I'm hands on the keyboard with companies actually writing code. You know, I sit in the trenches, as I call it, and I'm there part of the team shipping code. And I see a lot of different front ends, particularly in Angular, and I travel around a lot of different teams. And I've been really lucky to work with two big monorepos in the last couple of years. One is for the Australian government. I worked for their welfare department, and we did a rewrite of one of their sections. We had about 7 or 8 Angular teams, all shipping code every day into the repository. And we had multiple front ends that came out of this repository. And then more recently, I've moved back to Sydney and work with a different team. And they're a multinational company and they sell serviced offices. And I'm in the same position helping get their Monorepo that they already have in shape. So it's really close to my heart. I spend all day working in Monorepos, talking about build pipelines, talking about how teams can share code and the pros and cons with it. Because it's not black and white. You're going to hear me talk today, you know, great about monorepos, but also talk bad about monorepos. They're just as tricky as any other architecture. So hopefully I can really share some of the pros and cons and some of the mistakes that I've made doing monorepos across all these different teams. And I get the chance to sit in other teams that I might not ship code to, but also get to see some of the mistakes they've made. So for me, this journey really started, like I said, about 2 years ago. This blog post came out from one of the Angular core team members. He said, you too can love monorepos. And you can see the date on it's about 2 years old. So this trend has been going for a while now in the front end. On the back end, everyone's like, nah, we're microservices all the way. But on the front end, we're seeing a move towards more monorepos for a while now, especially in the Angular community. So shortly after this, there was a podcast, one of the most famous Angular podcasts that was about monorepos. I'm like, oh, this is interesting because I'm doing all of this NPM packages to share code amongst my projects. I was writing Pluralsight courses about it. I was going on site to clients, helping them share code with NPM packages between web and mobile. And then this stuff's starting to pop up. Then I learned that Google and Facebook use monorepos, which kind of made me go, well, you can't say it doesn't work. If Google can have one repository for all the code, and you make an update, say, as an Angular developer, like in the Angular team, and every other Angular code base in Google is going to get that change as soon as it goes to master, it's hard to argue that mono repositories don't work. But I think you need to do mono repositories right, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So about the same time, about 2 years ago, this product came out. This team, Narwhal, who are made of ex-Googlers, a couple of developers from the Angular team left. They're now much bigger. I don't know how many people they've got, more than 20 people around the world. And they're a consulting company. They were like, well, we developed a lot of monorepos at Google, or one monorepo, but they were involved in being in a monorepo. They want to do this with their clients. So they built this tool, NX, called Narwhal Extensions for Angular, but now it's changing very rapidly away from just being for Angular, and they support React as well. So today we're going to be talking about lots of things. We're going to talk about monorepos and why you should care. Do you want to use a monorepo? Because there's other options. We're going to talk about NX a fair bit. We're going to talk about its building blocks. It's one of the best tools, I think, at the moment if you're going to do a monorepo to not end up having a monorepo that turns into a monolith. We're going to talk about code organization and naming because it's always tricky, deciding what folder structure to follow. We're going to talk about developer workflow and pipelines because you're going to spend a lot more time doing DevOps and pipelines and your CI/CD if you've got a monorepo because you have to figure out something changed. I can't build everything. So just a quick show of hands. Who's using Angular here? Nice strong hands. Nothing wussy. Come on, put them up in the air. Okay, most of the room. Okay, who's using React? Oh, okay, it's actually maybe not most of the room. Maybe it's a bit more split. I know there's another React talk on at the moment, so it's hard to say if all the Angular developers are going to move to React or all the React came in here, but who knows what that means. So what about NX? Who's using NX in production at the moment? Okay, hands really high. Who's heard of NX before? Oh, okay, so not many of you have heard of NX before. Okay, cool. So today I'm going to walk you through it. You're going to see lots of it. I think it's a fantastic tool, but the patterns and practices I'm talking about, you could apply this without NX. So a lot more about that. So why care about a monorepo? Well, first of all, I want to start off, there's a really big difference between a monorepo and a monolith because a monolith really is a position I think you end up in circumstance where you just start off and you don't, you just grow and grow and grow. And you're really stuck. If you need to deploy or you need to build and test, everything has to be done. You haven't got any smarts in there. And I think that's really the difference between a monorepo and a monolith. So it's terrible that they both start with the word mono because there's a lot of confusion about what they are. Because if I asked everyone in the room, who wants to come build a monolith with me? Anyone a consultant? Maybe consultants like it, but no one wants to build a monolith. So really, building a monorepository, and this is kind of the technical definition, it's pretty straightforward, is where you have many projects in the single repository, most likely Git repository these days. So monorepos kind of have three primary characteristics. The first one is that you have multiple projects in your code base, and that's kind of like a monolith. The second one is that you can share code. There's a dependency amongst these projects because they're in the same repository. So it's very easy to share code amongst them. It's almost too easy, but it's really easy. And you share a lot more code than, say, having a microsites approach. But the third one is something that really, I think, differentiates a monorepo from a monolith. And that is that you only rebuild, retest, and redeploy the things that are changed. So really, we learnt about moving fast this morning in one of the keynotes. If you do a monorepo correctly, there's no reason why you can't have something that's independent of the other stuff that ships independently to a different place. So this is kind of what it would look like. Imagine you've got two apps. You could have much more than that. And this first app has a whole bunch of code that's just for that app. It's not going to be very good to share. It's kind of specific to that domain. But then you might have a whole bunch of other libs or pieces of code that can be shared across these other apps. Authentication, UI components, things like that. And then app 2 would have its own, libs or pieces of code that are just for it. And then underneath, you would have all of these shared pieces and then your NPM packages. So one of the hallmarks of a good monorepo is that you've got the same version of everything. Same Angular, same React, same TypeScript version. They're all using the same version of everything. Same Ramda or underscore or whatever you want to use. But it doesn't mean you can't ship these to anywhere you want. So you could ship app 1 to its own domain. Even though the code lives in the same place, there's nothing stopping you from building just that little piece and shipping that part of code to its own app in its own place. And the same goes for app 2. You could put it under a completely different web server, completely different URL, or it could just be a subdomain in this position here where we're calling it app2.some domain name. You can even stick your backend into your front-end monorepos. So this big government project that I worked on, we had like a node kind of sitting in front of all the other legacy code that we had in the back end. So we had Node also in our Mono repository. And that was a really awesome circumstance for me. It was the first time I've had TypeScript front end to back end. And it was actually kind of fun because you can get so much code reuse. All of the interfaces and enums and all those things that describe what your back end's got, you can just straight away use those in the front end, which is really cool. And you have a really tight understanding of when those contracts change. So let's just say we had a change here though in this particular piece of code, in this lib, in this red box here for app 1. If that code changes, then we know that then we're going to have to redeploy this part of our monorepo. So it's not a monolith in the sense that you have to redeploy everything. So, but that's only this side. If we were to have a change down here in something that was used in both apps, of course, you're going to need to have to redeploy all of those sections of your application. But the key thing is here is you have the tooling and you know what's changed to be able to do this. But then you get the benefits of all the code sharing and knowing that you don't break other things. So what are the benefits and weaknesses of doing a monorepo? And honestly, I'm very black and white about it. I don't think that monorepos are the only answer. I think they're a great solution for the front end, which is why they're so popular, but it's not the only way. But some of the reasons why they're good, like I said, you have the same version of everything. And for example, you'd have the same version of TypeScript. If you're going to have 2 Angular apps and a React app, they're all sharing the same node modules folder, same dependency. But of course, everything that is an up is also a downside, anything in architecture. They're pros and cons. You can't really just say monorepos are for everybody. So the weakness on that side is you have to have every team that's ready to update. So we're in a position in the current team, we have an outsourced team who work independently from us and have a different manager, they're in a different country. And we all want to move to Angular 9. It's in RC, we're getting ready for it. It's, who knows, anyone can guess, maybe a month away. And we want to move to it, but we're going to need them to also be ready to move to it. So you have to, this is kind of also challenging that everybody has to come together in that journey. And that can slow you down. It's slowing us down right now. But on the good side of it is this project is not going to get left behind and it inevitably will just be a rewrite because it's going to get too far in the past. But it's pros and cons. You build all the changes at once. So I said changes here. So anything that changes, you get to build, but you don't have to build it without knowing what the consumer of another application in another repository is going to do. So when you build it, you know that if something's using it, it's also going to get built and tested at the same time, which was one of the nice things about this approach is you have a lot more confidence because you know what is using this code is actually living in the same repository and it's going to break the things that you want it to break before you go to production in someone else's application in some other web server. But there's a fair bit of DevOps overhead. So there's definitely a cost to this. Like if you're not, highly skilled team on doing a lot of CI/CD pipelines, you're going to have to invest a little more in it. And if you are skilled at it, you're still going to have to invest time in it because you kind of win in the code sharing and the ease of it, but then you have to be a bit more sophisticated to know, oh, this changed, then we'll release just this app, and this changed, then we'll release just this app. And I think one of the things I really like is consistent code standards. So we're in this position in this previous project I was working for the government. They're trying to spend all their money before the end of the financial year. I don't know if that happens here, but it gets to the end, they've got only so much money and then the project's going to go down. That's it. They've got to ship it. So we had about 5 Angular teams working on this project and we were able to pick up 3 Angular teams from another department about 2 months out from shipping something that was about a year's worth of work. And we were able to bring them straight into our Monorepo. They were already used to doing a Monorepo in a different department. They were already used to using Angular and all the same tools. And we just gave them each a different subdomain that they could work in. They had their own apps and they were able to work independently and start shipping code with us. So if we didn't have that consistent code and that consistent nature for all these things, we wouldn't have been able to have such an easy onboarding of new teams so quickly to upskill. But then maybe potentially there's a downside in this because now there's so much code in there that's Angular, that's shareable, that business is like, I don't want to let some other team do React, even though they're jumping up and down and saying they want to do it, because I want to get all this benefit from this code that we already have that we reuse. So maybe, but again, if you do a monorepo properly, it doesn't matter if you bring in another project that's using a different technology. So you can do that. You get really easy code sharing, and I mentioned this before, I really like the code sharing in this scenario, and I'll share a lot more code. If I was to share code between, say, 2 different repositories, I might share the header, the buttons, the menu, those sorts of things. So I'll share that code, but I'm very unlikely to share something really trivial and small. I'm not going to go make an NPM package for my team just to have a button that if I click shows a spinner. Because I've got to go make an NPM package, I've got to put a version on it, I've got to put in my, set up the pipeline for it. And it's just that one button, it's too hard. I'm too under the pump. I'm just going to copy and paste it into the other project. But in a monorepo, it's sharing code by default. So you're much more likely to just think, oh, I'll make this shared library that doesn't have a version, that's just a button and I click on it and anyone who wants to use it can come use it in these other projects. And I know who's using it because I can make a dependency graph, and I'll show you that in a second. But people need to be ready for the latest change. So one of the downsides, I'll talk about the bloody stuff that comes in these monorepos as well, is if now I'm in a position where 2 teams are using my special button with the spinner click, but I make a breaking change to it. I have to go communicate with this other team and say, hey, look, I'm going to break your code because we have to do this breaking change on this little button with a spinner. And can you please change your code? So what often happens in this case is someone will be like, oh, I'll just copy and paste. I'll have a special spinner for app 1 that's just this one. So it's not all glory, but at least you still have the position to know exactly which apps and which teams and who owns which code, and you can go have that conversation. So hopefully I'm not talking you out of monorepos here. I'm just trying to paint a picture that, you know, they're super awesome. You can really increase your velocity if they're done well. So what are your alternatives to doing a monorepo? Well, of course you can do a monolith. And I think the line between a good monorepo and a monolith blurs a little bit. If you don't get this right, you can end up in a monolith scenario where you've just built one giant application in your monorepo and it becomes a monolith. But your other option is to do like microsites, where you would have different repositories, each with their own potentially backends. And 2 years ago, this is what we're doing for a couple of years. I've done this quite successfully, and I really like this approach as well. But I'll show you more of that in a second. But really, this slide paints a picture for me. If you're on the far end of either of this, you're probably intentional and you're probably very happy. If you get stuck in the middle, you're probably here because you just organically ended up here, and you might have a much harder time. And no one wants to work in a monolith where your velocity is going to go down and you can't ship as much. So I think both sides have their problems, but I think we're seeing a trend towards monorepos a lot more on the front end for this reason of code sharing and ease of that. So if I was to do microsites, it would be a bit different. I'd have all this code in this one section here. I would have my own node modules, my own repository, and I'd ship it to its own web server. And then if I wanted to share code between this site and another site, I'd make an NPM package. It's trivial these days. There's lots of tools that will just make you an NPM package as part of your code gen and have all the compiling and everything there. And then you might have another app completely independent. It's got its own node modules, its own code, and it wants to share this code as well. Now, this is not such a bad scenario. You could also have a node backend and it's sharing that code. And then you could just go make a whole bunch of these. All of these separate, different little pieces of NPM packages you could share around. But then your overhead goes up in a different way because I often don't see this. I don't see many companies go, oh, I'm going to make a little spinner button component and I'll make an NPM package. What I see is it comes down to like 2 packages. You got something like header and core. And core has everything. Has all the UI components that are going to be shared, and then that's churning all the time, so its version changes are going really fast, and it's just too big and it becomes like an app in itself. But let's just say you do this successfully, and teams do, and you make a change now to this piece of code. The big downside during your development cycle for this approach is that this NPM package now needs to be updated in all the places that it's being used. Good thing is it's versioned. Unlike the Monorepo, where there's no versions yet, you either have to make a copy of it or please beg to the other team to fix the breaking change you're making. But in this scenario, it's quite painful, especially for really fast-moving code, like all of your interfaces and your domain models. Your API is changing at warp speed. They're adding new endpoints, and you need all these contracts in the front end with your interfaces, and you want to share those between them. Then it gets really tricky. So in this scenario, dev cycle is really painful. You've got to go to that repository, update that NPM package, write much better unit tests, because you don't know the person who's going to pull it out of these 3 or more scenarios are ready for it, and you're going to break them. I really like that about a monorepo. I like the fact that I break stuff really early, and I didn't know that I broke some other team, because I can't, because I know I affected them, I know it's going to ask them to deploy it, and I know I'm going to have to contact them and let them know. But then on the flip side, this other team, if we're using NPM packages, can just sit there on an old version forever and not have to be affected. So pros and cons. But I really find this really slow and difficult for the dev cycle for slow-moving stuff. But you can do both. You can have a monorepo with some NPM packages. So micro frontends work in a monorepo as well. I think this is where we all get stuck thinking, I've got a mono something, so it must be a monolith. But it's not. It's a monorepo. And if you do a monorepo well, there's nothing stopping you from shipping all these mini apps. And in fact, you kind of have to. You have to really break out of this thing of like, oh, we're building a customer portal. It has to be one app. No, it could be 5 customer portal apps. They're just different feature slices that people go through this journey. They don't use half of this part of the customer portal, so put that in a different subdomain. So you really can. So down in Canberra for this government job that I did in Australia, I think we had something like 25 Angular sites, but it was one application. So all different subdomains and sometimes slashes on the back. We had 25 Angular sites. Some of the sites were 2 pages. Landing page, 2 pages, and then you go off on all these different user experiences. So we had a lot of DevOps overhead for that, but it was great. We could just grab a small team and say, stay away from us, go write some code, here's your whole app, it's going to ship somewhere else, be really confident you're not going to break anything, here's a whole bunch of UI stuff you can share from us, and every time you check in, we're all going to see it anyway, so we'll review your code, and we can get a whole bunch of security that when you change, you're not going to break something else, and if you do, we get to know it. So that side's really good. So you can still do micro front ends. But you've got to be really careful. Don't turn your Monorepo, I've said this a couple of times, you don't want to turn your Monorepo into a monolith. So when I went down to Canberra and joined this team, one of their other departments was really progressive. They must have read the blog post about NX the day it came out 2 years ago and went, we need this architecture in our thing. And they implemented it straight away. They were really progressive, but they were early on before there was a lot of best practices. So they built the entire welfare system for the Australian government in a single application, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of multi-page forms. And they ended up in a position where it was just one app. They didn't kind of have experience with it. And then now they wanted to break that app into other apps, but they had just this huge monolith again because they'd built a monorepo using NX, but they still just built one application. So you really got to challenge your team and challenge people to say, no, we can make more than one app. Okay. So let's have a look at some of the NX building blocks. So you don't have to use NX. I love it to pieces. I think if I changed into something else like React, I do a lot of Angular, I would still use NX, because I really like it and it supports it. And it kind of supercharges all the hard bits of doing enterprise applications, all the best practices, all the continuous deployment, all the change detection. So NX is from a team of ex-Googlers, and this is their slogan. You can develop like Google and Microsoft and Facebook, and most of their team members come from these companies. They're used to doing monorepos. So they want the same tools for their customers that are banks and insurance companies and so forth. But it used to be just about Angular, that's where the team came from, but now it's whatever you want to do. So you can see here on the front page of their site, if you want to do React, then they support React. And they've now got React people on their team who are building out the NX tools for React, and it's ready to go. So NX, at the heart of it, is all about having apps that are composed from libs. So you have these empty like shells of an app that are not much other than like a single component that loads all these other components from whatever library you've got into the apps from these libs. So the libs are the shareable bits. And you do this in a workspace. So a workspace would look like this. You might have app 1 with some libs, and this should look familiar from what I showed you before. And then you might have a whole bunch of shareable libs. And some libs are just for the app, and other libs are just for everybody. And then you might have another app that has some libs that are just for them, and then a whole bunch of shareable things. But you have really clear boundaries around what is shareable and what isn't. And the tooling will give you linting errors if you try and use something from another app and you're not meant to. And the way you use something shared is much more open than something that's not. But there's a lot of thought that goes into this. There's a lot of practice about understanding how to name the folders and where to put them, and we'll talk about that. So this is a canonical example. Narwhal Airlines, it's a fake app that they talk about in their canonical book about how to do monorepos. And you could imagine here that you'd have 2 apps, a check-in app and a booking app. And then you might have some specific libs that are just for those apps. And then you might have a bunch of shared libs at the bottom here that both of them are using. So authentication, user profile, maybe it's something that shows them how to update their email components, or maybe like data models like your interfaces from your back end. So how do you get started doing this? If you want to use NX, it's mostly command line driven. It's all node tools like you used to. So you'd come in and you'd run a command like npx, create NX workspace and give your workspace a name. Then it's going to say, hey, what flavor of NX do you want? And I think this is really cool that you're now like, oh, it's not just Angular. We can do React. And there's different flavors of React. And then there's Node backends in here. You can do Express. You can do Nest. And it's all best practice stuff. It saves you weeks of development. I don't think I could even touch this in my whole teams. We could spend 6 months. I don't think we'd touch this. That team has taken 2 years to get to this point. It's pretty robust now. I choose my first application. Let's start with our check-in app. There'll be another one for booking. And then it's going to say, what style processor do you want to use? Are you more Reacty? Do you want to use this one, or do you want to use less? Let's just say SAS. And then it's going to go create all your files, and you can open it in Visual Studio Code or whatever you want. And you get a whole bunch of stuff in the directory here. You're going to get best practice stuff. You're going to get Prettier for formatting. You're going to get Cypress for your unit tests, for your end-to-end tests. You're going to get Jest for your unit tests. You're going to get all the TypeScript set up. But most importantly, you're going to get this apps and libs folder. And this is where you write your code. So you didn't have to do any of the other work. You just get going really quickly. So in the apps folder, it went and scaffolded us out an API folder. And this is where the Nest backend is. And then it gave us a check-in folder, which is where you'd put your check-in code or compose your libs into. And then it gave us an end-to-end folder. So every kind of app that has a front face to it, not the API stuff, will have an ETE folder scaffolded out for your end-to-end tests. And then in your libs folder here, you've just got the beginning of what will be hundreds of libs and like hundreds of different nested folder structures. And here they just gave us a single API interfaces scaffolded out by default. It's got a single file called api-interfaces.ts, and it gives us this simple little message interface in TypeScript, has a single property that's shared amongst both of the API and the app. But this is where the excitement comes with NX, because it gives you a whole bunch of commands out of the box. I'm opening up package.json file here, and you can see all the scripts that you can run. So these are just the basics. You can build, test, end-to-end test, and it just works straight away with all the best tools that things like Angular might not necessarily always give you, Cypress and Jest. They might want to give you Protractor and Karma, but these guys are pretty progressive. You can see all these affected scripts. We'll talk about those in a second. But down here is the real glue that glues all this Monorepo stuff together. So it's a command that says, I want to run a dep graph or a dependency graph. So I can run this in the terminal, and it's going to spit out a dependency graph. And this is where you start to be able to know what's changed amongst all your different projects and what are the relationships. So here it's very simple. We just have two apps, an API and a check-in. And then we have an API interface that has that single file with that single interface, but we can see the dependency. So the way that works is if I open up this check-in folder, this check-in app, and we drill down to the main starting component, there's this import here, and we're importing from this namespace, this TypeScript path, this @Narwhal Airlines, that'll be specific to your business. And this import is what NX is going to parse your app and find all the imports and understand your dependency graph. And it's going to be able to, you can override it and do other bits, but this is the nuts and bolts of it. And it's going to be able to understand what are the dependencies between all your places and who can and can't touch these dependencies, and give you linting errors saying, whoa, you're trying to import that. You're not allowed to do that. You're in a different team or so forth. But basically, this is how it glues together. Now, I've been writing a lot of code in the command line here. Well, not writing code. I think you're all figured out I've just got a clicker. But we don't have to just use the command line for this. I love the command line. I really feel like I've kind of lost touch with myself when I'm using a GUI. But I have to admit their GUI is pretty good. It'll probably not be called Angular Console soon because they're moving towards React and everything else. But down here, I can go install this in Visual Studio Code and I get the Angular console. And I can then see all the different things that I can do. And they've got all this code scaffolding and there's third-party libraries. So I want to use Angular because I'm an Angular dev and I want to make an application. It's going to say, what do you want to name this application? I say, I want to call it booking. I go to check in, now I want a booking. And it's going to show me this in the red down here, a dry run. And it's going to say, I'm about to make this for you, which is really cool. The tools are getting robust. And you can go, oh yeah, they're the files that I want. I put it in the right folder structure. And then you can come up to the top of the page and say, yep, generate that for me. And it will generate you all this code and make you those apps, which is really cool. It gives you best practices really fast for code generation. If you're used to using a CLI tool, it's kind of like that, but on steroids. And now our dependency graph's updated. We have this new dependency that's just floating out in space. It's not using anything. But soon it will be touching all the other bits when it starts pulling in these libs and sharing code. Okay. I can also scaffold other things. I don't just have to scaffold apps and libs. I can do NGRX, which is Redux for Angular, and I can say, hey, can you give me that? And it will go do best practices for that, which has been great for us. Down in Canberra, I inherited like half a team of Java developers, because we just needed an army of people and we upskilled them into Angular. And they didn't know Redux, and Redux can be complicated, Like, it's a bit of a learning curve. And they came into our team, they could scaffold that stuff out, they can see other projects. They were able to get up to speed really quickly and not have to kind of come up with these conventions themselves. So if you have big teams and you want a strong convention, it's really good. So one of the challenges, though, I've found with using NX, which is kind of getting easier now because so many more people are doing it and they're releasing more guides, is folder structure. Because any folder structure is difficult. If you open a project and you open up the thing, all of a sudden you've got hundreds of files. You're like, oh my God, where's what? And it's all organically, this guy likes saying core, this person likes saying shared, this person likes their services over here and their unit tests here. But there's some strong conventions kind of coming out. And folder structure is tricky. It really, I've done several of these big monorepos and I still end up in a daily conversation about this, but it's getting a bit easier. And that's mostly because of this book. It came out about a year ago now, and it kind of spells out like what NX and the Narwhal team think you should do for your naming strategy. So there's 4 types of libs that they recommend. The first one's feature libs. This is where you put your container or your smart components, your actual logic. There's data access for all your API requests in your JavaScript. There's UI logic for all your DOM or presentational components. And there's utils for all of your JavaScript utilities. So maybe a service that does some calculations or other sorts of things. And this is really easy, I understand this really quickly. What bends our brains is which directory should I stick these into? Because they end up nested. And my gut feeling as a developer is I go, I don't want to nest too deep, but you really do need to if you're going to do a monorepo. You do want to actually get these folders nested, and the names will be long, but it's what gives you the ability to get this affected changes and only building what you need to build. So there's 2 types. There's shared, which makes sense. Anything everybody can have goes in this folder. But it's this one that's tricky, the app feature folder. And we made a pretty big mistake in the monorepo I did for the government in that we kind of just jumped in and wrote so much code, and we thought we'll never end up sharing this code with anybody else. It's just going to be for the welfare department, for businesses who want to do claims to work with the government. But in the end, some other department found out, oh, you're writing all these claim forms. We need those as well. Can we come into the repo? But we're going to be a different application. And all of a sudden, we had 2 kind of domains, but we'd just been living in this idea that would have 1. So I really recommend that you start off having kind of think ahead of time if you're going to ever have another app. So that would look like this. So in our libs folder here, forget about the API interfaces that it's scaffolded out. That should be sucked into the shared folder. But what these other ones are based on apps. So straight away I have a booking folder that's a directory, and inside of there I'll have libs. And it's app-based, and then or team-based. And then I have another check-in folder that's for my check-in app, and then inside of there I'll have libs, rather than just straight away putting libs straight into the top level. So when I open this out, you see the structure. To me now, this looks normal, but if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said, what the hell? Like, this looks weird to me. These like conventional names, data access, feature shell, UI, and the nesting of them. So you can see here in the check-in, data access, feature shell, and UI are probably all lib level. They're 1 lib, and if you get the code out of that lib, you're going to get all of it when you ask for it. But down here in the shared one, the UI in there that has presentational or DOM components is probably another directory down that then has more libs inside of it. So it can get quite 3 levels deep here. But you don't want to be scared of that 3 levels deep. If I was starting a project today for a company, I'd straight away just say, yep, we're going to make top level things for every app that you've got. Because the company I just joined, they had a monorepo at the start, and we went through the process of refactoring everything because I was hired to write a new app, but everything was on the root. So be careful of that. So let's move on to talk a little bit about pipelines, because you're going to spend much more time here because you don't want to build everything. And long pipelines are painful because if you have to wait 30 minutes to give some other developer your change, if it runs and passes the first time, then it gets painful because it probably won't pass the first time because you're rushing, and then it's a 60-minute ordeal to get code into someone else's computer, and that's a bit too long. But you're going to spend more time building your CI/CD pipelines. But how it works with NX is really great. Out of the box, if I go and make a change like this, we're looking at a Git commit, it's all based on Git commits. So if I make a Git commit, and I make this simple change. I brought in this one dependency, line 4 in the green. I'm using this shared UI button module. And you can see the folder structure, shared, UI, and then I have a button module. So the naming really helps you navigate these big, large applications as well on the front end. But if I've got this changed now, I can come into the npm, the package.json, look at my npm scripts. This is out of the box, and there's these affected scripts. And this is the real money for NX for me. This is where I get to only build, test, and deploy the things that have changed. So I can say, I want to run this affected dep graph. Make me a dep graph, but only show me in red what's changed. So here you can see that this check-in UI search down the bottom has now been used by the feature shell, and I'm going to need to rebuild the check-in app and deploy that. I never look at these. These get massive. I would need a monitor from here to the end of the room to look at the dependency graph because you make so many libs and apps. But under the covers, what's important is NX knows. So when I go back to here, I can run this one here that I say, hey, I want to run affected build and affected E to E and affected test. And what it does is it's going to go look at the tip of master or whatever, SHA commit that you say, look at whichever branch and look at the current feature branch that I'm working on that I've just committed to and find the differences. And then it can know what to build. So this, I just jumped into my team last night while I was in the hotel room and pulled just one of the random pipelines. We don't have the most sophisticated pipeline in this team yet. We're still building that strength. We just do one flat. We don't branch off and do all the easy failures quickly, but it still works pretty good. So these build time, I know right now that whoever checked this in is not building our entire Monorepo. Because if I look at the time here, it took a minute to format and check the entire project. I know this straight away has to be at least only one project. It can't be all of them because it takes a lot longer. Unit tests took 2 minutes, and it's not because we don't write many unit tests, it's because it's a very new feature. It probably only has about 10 pages. It's got quite a good lot of test coverage, but it's fast because I'm only testing that one section. End-to-end tests, 2 minutes, and it took 2 minutes to build an Angular app. And if you know anything about Angular apps, as they get bigger, they definitely don't take 2 minutes. They're usually 6 minutes, 7 minutes. And if you have, really big ones, it can take even longer. So this is really the good stuff of it, but you'll spend a fair bit of time configuring these pipelines. So there's lots in NX. I've kind of skipped all this stuff about, how do you limit which team can do what and get fair warning around it and talk about code ownership. There's quite a strong tooling for that. But what we have looked at is we looked at why you should consider a monorepo for your front ends and why you might want to do that. We had a look at the NX building blocks about apps and libs. We had a look at code organization and naming, and you should go get that book and read it twice. It probably took me more than 2 reads to get it out of there. And then we looked at pipelines and how the affected scripts work and how awesome they are. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me in Sri Lanka. It's been great to be here. It's my first time. And if you want to get in touch with me, this is my Twitter handle. Just send me a message. Or if you see me around the conference, I'd love to have a chat. Anything monorepos or Angular, I love to talk about it. Thank you very much.